Hello, I'm Remington, welcome. So, I decided that it was finally time to do a 2023 recap video, in no small part due to Daniel Green's recent video where he ranked all of the books that he has reviewed on his channel, both because it just looked like fun as well as because the website that he used made it look very simple, and I like simple things because I'm lazy. So I'm just going to go chronologically through all 53 books that I read last year, ranking them from S to, I should change that, from S to F. And then, of course, DNFs for the few books that I didn't actually finish, but I'm still counting them as I read them because I read a decent portion of them, and I've decided that I'm probably not going to come back to most of them. So the first book that I read in 2023 was Pandora's Lab by Paul A. Oft. So, I have to move the camera a little bit so I can actually see the screen. Yikes. There we go. Okay, so Paul A. Oft wrote a very interesting book about the history of science, specifically how it has been used for evil many times for very not good reasons. He looks at lobotomies, he looks at eugenics and the opioid epidemic, as well as also, I think the most interesting story in this book is the story of Fritz Haber and how he developed nitrogen fixation, which was very useful for helping the world hunger crisis and the agricultural revolution, but at the same time also he basically invented the modern bomb. So there's that. He was not a very good person at the end of his life. But overall, super interesting book. If you're at all interested in the morality of science or the history of science, I'd highly recommend it. Then, next up, I read an absolutely remarkable thing. I love how terrible I am at typing on this keyboard. I love Hank Green, even though I don't love how silent he's been on the Palestinian genocide. I still think he's a great guy and he's doing great things in the world, and I like his books too. I don't love this one. I think the second one is a lot better, but the story overall is super interesting. I really like the social media viewpoint of how an alien invasion would happen. Like, that is super interesting to me, and he captures that really well. I think some of the characters in the book, their motivations at some points are a little strange and felt kind of disjointed, but other than that, I enjoyed the book quite a bit. Where the deer and the how do you spell antelope? God, deer and the antelope. Jesus, that's still wrong, but close enough. So this book is the first one that I really didn't like in 2023. I love Nick Offerman, specifically from Parks and Rec. Amazing on Parks and Rec. I really love his character, and I've liked most of what I've heard him speak in interviews as well. And I like some portions of this book quite a bit when he's just talking about how important the environment is to him and his experiences being in national parks. That's great. I love those parts of the book. But then he just develops into preaching to the choir about how terrible the other side is while not offering any solutions or talking in a way that would ever win anybody over who disagrees with them. He's just bashing the other side. And I feel like that's only self-aggrandizing. Like, there's nothing that's going to come of that. And so I really like that. I really dislike that kind of rhetoric in books, and because of that, I'm putting it in F tier, because it was just an absolute slog to get through. Then after that, I read Free Will by Sam Harris. This is a very tiny book. It's like 75 pages long, maybe 50. And it's basically just outlining why free will doesn't exist. Sam Harris isn't really taken seriously in the philosophy world, especially after his book, The Moral Landscape. But this one, I think he pretty much hits the nail on the head. He backs it up with a couple different research papers that were written and different studies. As well as his background as a neuroscientist, he can talk about this one pretty in depth, and I think he covers it very well, and basically just makes the argument that if you're given the choice between water and milk, you can't pick one over the other. Your brain has already chosen, and by the time you're consciously aware of it, you can't change that decision. It's not that you are acted upon by like outside forces, it's that the conscious you isn't the one making the choice, pretty much. And I really like the book. I think it's very interesting to think about, and I think he makes a good case, so I'll put it in A. Then we have Mortality by Christopher Hitchens. And of course, I spelled all of that wrong. No, I just didn't capitalize his name, that's why it's giving me red flags. Christopher Hitchens was writing this book near the end of his life. And so he's talking about his own death and about his cancer and how that's affecting him and how he feels, and just looking back over his life in general. It's a very personal book. And the best part of the book, or the most powerful, I should say, is near the end. He didn't actually finish writing the book before he died, so at the end there's just a whole bunch of different like bullet point ideas of things that he wanted to discuss further in the book. I'll put it in A. It's a very good book. I'd recommend it if you're a fan of Christopher Hitchens, or just the idea of mortality in general, honestly. Then we have The Great Gatsby. I didn't like The Great Gatsby at all. It's very beautifully written, to the point where I felt like it was just like flowing over my mind like water over a basketball. Like it was just in one ear, out the other. I only remember the first and last chapter, pretty much. Like everything in between there is just a blur, and that's partially on me, of course. I probably wasn't in the best state of mind when I was reading it. But yeah, I didn't like it. It's probably worth a reread, because I know, like, obviously it's a classic and a lot of people love it, and I do remember it being incredibly beautiful as I was reading it, but I did not enjoy it as I was reading it, so I'm going to put it in D for now. But that's subject to change. Next up, I read Misery by Stephen King. God damn, I can't spell. This was the first book that I read in 2023 that I was like, yes, I love this. It was like crack to my brain. The story of the writer in this house during the winter. He can't get away because he's broken, his legs are broken, and he's being taken care of by his #1 fan. It's not horror as I expected from Stephen King. It's more of a thriller, but oh my goodness, is this such a good book. I would highly recommend it. This is a S-tier book. It definitely contributed to how much I read last year, because it was just that good. Then I read Letter to a Jesus Christ Christian Nation. Can you tell I don't type on the keyboard much? So this is a very old book written by Sam Harris. It was, well, I shouldn't say very old, it was written in 2006. But for the topic that it discusses, it's pretty old, because it discusses basically Christian nationalism in America, and that has gone down considerably. It's not that it doesn't apply anymore, it's just that a lot of the statistics in the book are pretty outdated, and atheism in general has been much more accepted in America since the writing of this book. A lot of it does still apply though, and he makes a pretty compelling case as to why you should consider not being a Christian nationalist. So I wouldn't highly recommend this book to many people, just because, like I said, it's kind of outdated, and I think most people are at least pretty accepting of the idea of America not being a Christian nation. But I don't know. There's certainly some people that could benefit from reading it, and for what it was worth, I did enjoy it. Then we have number 9, Millions of Little Threads. There we go, I actually spelled one right all the way through. This one's written by Anthony Pantano, I think. Gotta wait until it loads so I can actually see. That one's not working for whatever reason. Robert Pantano, I forgot. Okay, I only need one. Okay, so this is a very short book. I think it's only an audio book. It's a dystopian sci-fi that is basically just looking at mental implants that artificially release like serotonin to make you happy all the time. So you are never inconvenienced, you are never wanting anything, you have the perfect life essentially from your point of view. And it outlines how one person basically didn't want it, but then they were forced to get it because everybody else got it, and it doesn't work for them. And the absolute horror that they go through because of that. And it's basically just exploring the idea of, is the opium for the masses worth the cost of the people that are left behind? And it sounds far more interesting than it is, not to knock it, because it is a good read or a good listen, because I think it's only available in audio format. But it's obvious that he hasn't written too much long form like this. But that's not to knock it, because it is good. It's just not as tightly written, and it's not as, I don't know, I read it a while ago, so I can't exactly remember what my main problems were with it, but it was a solid B-tier book. That's as much as I remember, and it was more interesting conceptually than in practice. Then we have number 10, Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. This is a fantastic book that I would recommend to anyone who ever wants to make anything remotely creative. It's basically just giving you permission to take the things that you like and use them as inspiration to create more things. It separates plagiarism and inspiration very nicely. And yeah, the whole thing's just giving you permission to start. Just create the thing that you want to create. Highly recommend it to anyone who is at all interested in creative work. Very good. Then we also have On Writing by Stephen King. And again, Stephen King. I don't know why I can't type his name. So this one, it's a pretty niche recommendation for a Stephen King book. I wouldn't recommend it to most people. The only people that I would recommend it to are obviously people who are interested in writing, or people who want to know more about his history, because he talks about how he got started. He talks about his accident and how that affected him. So for both of those reasons, very good writing advice too. Then number 12, we have Show Your Work, again by Austin Kleon. Okay, there we go. This one is not nearly as good as the other one, but it is very good still. Basically, this one's just him telling you that often today, showing your work, showing how you are making it and documenting that process can be just as powerful and just as worthwhile as the actual end product itself. And again, it's not as good as the other one, but it's still very worth the read if you make things online. Solid B tier. I feel like we're gonna have a space problem in a little bit. Then The Moral Landscape. So this is the one that a lot of people have problems with when it comes to Sam Harris, because basically he just walks into the moral philosophical arena, gives his opinion, and walks out without taking any criticism or any notes. He just ignores all of the work that is already put out by actual philosophers considering morality, and just gives his opinion and completely dismisses anything else. I still think overall he does make some good points about basically we should do the maximum good for the maximum amount of people. That's pretty hard to dispute. But with the nuance that comes with that, I think he's very lacking, and there were some of the basic principles that he was arguing in this I just think are kind of defeatist and not true, and could do with a little bit more refinement that he didn't seem at all interested in. And number 13, the moral landscape. Oh, that was 13, we just did that one. 14, Breach of Peace by Daniel Green. I like Daniel Green a lot. I think that his videos are great, and he often has fantastic takes when it comes to books in the publishing industry. And as a creator, I like him a lot. This book I did not love. The story itself, for what it was pretty good. It was pretty short, very short, and just felt like it should have been about the first third of a novel, because this is a novella. It's the introduction to, I think, a trilogy. I know that there's at least one more book. I don't know if he's releasing a third part to it or not. But something that really bugged me about this book was the portrayal of police using firearms. And I don't want this to come across any way that I'm pro-police, because I'm not. But the use of firearms in this book it's very clear that he has never handled firearms. He knows nothing about it, because the way that they're just one cop threatens another cop with their gun, and then just nothing comes of that. That is not what happens. And I get that this is a fantasy world, and they wouldn't have the same rules, but still, it was very clear that he has no idea what he's talking about when it comes to firearms handling. Round Ireland with a Fridge. So this book was recommended to me, well, not directly recommended to me, but recommended by John Green in one of his videos years ago. And obviously I had to read it, because how can you not want to read Round Ireland with a Fridge? That is a fantastic title. Better title than it is an actual book. I'd say if this book were half as long, it would be fantastic. It'd probably be an A-tier book, because it is genuinely funny at many points. However, it just drags on for too long, and it's just the same thing over and over again of just a guy stopping at different places with a fridge, and it just it gets old pretty quick. This is actually one that I DNF'd. I had 2 chapters left, but I was just so uninterested in finishing it just because it's so repetitive. The number 16, Ending Hunger by Anthony Warner. This book is pretty dense, but it is so good. I'm very interested in the topic of world hunger and how we stop that, because I think that is the most basic issue regarding human decency, because we produce 1.5 times the food that we need to feed the world, but we don't. Millions and millions of people go hungry. Millions just in the United States alone. So, and this book is a very good overview of the entire topic. It goes into issues like environmentalism and soil erosion. It goes into corruption. It goes into distribution. And it goes pretty in depth in all of those, and it's very meticulously researched and cited. And I love a book that has a lot of citations. That is always makes me happy to see. So if you are at all interested in the topic, I would very much recommend you read this book. It's also pretty entertaining for what it's worth. Ending Hunger. Okay, number 17, The Lotus and the Cross by Ravi Zacharias. Mess that up a little bit. So Jesus talks with Buddha. That's what this book is about. It is a Socratic dialogue, or an attempt at a Socratic dialogue between Jesus and the Buddha. And it's basically just a character assassination of Buddha. It is so dishonest in its portrayal. It is written by a Christian who was talking with Buddhists and then decided to write this book based off his experiences. And I just feel like he came up with a couple arguments against Buddhism and then decided to write a whole book about that, and then never talked to any Buddhists again. He didn't try to actually make sure that he was properly representing them, and even the distribution of dialogue in the book is very clear that it's very pro-Jesus and not an honest attempt at all at giving Buddhism a fair shake. Or not DNF, it is an F tier book because, well, I'm even going to put it at the bottom of F because it is just so dishonest. And I'm not even like pro-Buddhist or anything. It was just so clear that it was so one-sided. This one, Summer, by, I don't remember who it's by. Oh no, and they're all premium. I will put the names of the artist and the writer right here. But this, oh, I read this a long time ago. I don't remember too much about it. I remember it was very sweet and very lovely, pretty, not exactly cozy, because it was about a family on vacation, and they were basically just dealing with trauma, the mother and the daughter. And I remember it being a little funny at points too, but it was sad. And like, it was just them working through trauma. That's about all that I remember from it. But I remember thinking it was pretty okay. I don't remember enough to put it in B tier, but it was worth the read, if I remember correctly. Then we have the Elements of a God Style by William Strunk. So this is just a writing composition book. It's incredibly short. Like, it's not even a book, it's more like a pamphlet. But for someone who didn't write any papers in high school and hasn't been to college yet, I very much need this for when I go to college, because, like, as you can tell with my typing skills, I'm very bad. I need to learn more about writing and composition, and so this, as having it as like a reference, is very useful for me. But if you already know how to do that, then there's no reason why you should pick up this book. But for me, I'm not even going to put it in S just because it's so specific for what it is. I'm going to put it in A. Then number 20, we have Sentient by Jeff Lemire. This was another book that was a complete miss for me. I know that there are a lot of people that really love this one. I am not one of them. I thought that it was comedically bad at times. Some of the dialogue is just, in such a serious moment, to be written as poorly as it was, I laughed out loud at a couple of the lines. I think it's trying to be way more serious than it needs to be, because it's about these kids that are on a spacecraft, and all the adults end up dying because of a mutiny. And then it's just an AI trying to take care of these kids and wrestling with that, because that's not what it's programmed for. And like, it's kind of growing throughout the story and like becoming a better parental figure, but at the same time, it's just, I did not like it. It's not good. It's not good. It looks nice though for the most part, but it was just hilariously bad at some points. I'm sorry if you like it. If you like Sentient, I'm glad you enjoyed it, but I did not. But next up we have Jesus, my favorite book that I have ever read. Might help if I actually get his name in there. Craig Thompson, yeah. Jesus. Thompson. How the heck do you spell Thompson? Am I that dumb? Okay. Thompson. Okay, I'm just stupid. That's fine. But this is a absolutely wonderful book. I love it so very much. I made a video on it on this channel. Don't go watch that video, it's not good. Basically, it's just me saying how much I love it for 4 minutes straight. I don't actually talk much about what the book is or why it is so good. But it meant a lot to me because I was reading it when I was kind of sad. And it's basically a coming-of-age story of a young man, him dealing with the question of his religion, of his first love, and basically his growing up with his brother in the Midwest. All things which I very much related to, which is a huge part of why I love this book so much. Also, it's just very sweet. It's beautiful. It is an artistic masterpiece, in my opinion. It is my favorite book that I have ever read. And I will not hear any bad things about it. No criticisms. Okay, next up, number 22, we have The Courage to Be Disliked. When I read this book, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I think that it is philosophically untrue in its message. I don't think that any of the arguments actually hold up to scrutiny in its denial of trauma, but it is a very useful mental framing device to basically live your life as if the things that are stopping you, those are your decisions. You're deciding that you don't want to do whatever it is that you're hoping to accomplish because you're letting other things stop you. It's a useful framing device, but I don't think it is factually true. It is one of those books that the more I think about it, the more I'm like, it really has a point, and that doesn't make me happy because I hated reading it. And I hated the Socratic dialogue in here. There's so many times when I had questions that I wanted the youth, the guy who's like trying to learn from the philosopher in here. There's so many times when I wanted him to ask questions and he just didn't. He either disagreed with the old man or he asked some stupid question that really didn't matter. So maybe if this book had like better dialogue between the two, it would be a lot better. But for the most part, it was frustrating to read, even if it makes some really good points. At number 23, we have Letters to a Young Scientist. I can't spell scientist, but that's good enough because it knew what I meant. By Edward O. Wilson. This is the first book of his that I've read, and I have a couple others, one of which I've partially read, Journey to the Ants, which, like, ants are so interesting. I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to ants, just because I think that they're, like I said, they're super interesting. That's a topic for a whole nother video. Anyway, Edward O. Wilson is a entomologist. He specializes in ants, but he's also, he grew up like as a snake handler in a youth camp. That's like how he got his start in entomology. And this is basically a series of letters urging people to think scientifically, to engage in the world with a certain mindset of trying to learn and trying to prove yourself wrong. And I really liked it. It was very, very inspiring as someone who would eventually like to be an official scientist. Number 24, we have Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I did not finish this book because I was coming to this book wanting to know what C.S. Lewis thought about atheism. And he argues from first principles in this book. Basically, he argues, is there a God at all? Which he eventually comes to the conclusion that you can't disprove a God. And then he just goes on to argue that there is a God and it is the Christian God, which was the point where I stopped at. He doesn't ever give any evidence for a God. He just makes the argument that you can't disprove him, and he leaves it at that, which is why I didn't finish it, because you need to convince me of why I should even be entertaining the thought of there being a higher power, which so far I have not found a convincing argument for. But this one I do actually plan on coming back and reading the entire thing, because I think it's useful to have a more full understanding of Christianity in general, because it's a particular interest to me. I should not touch the microphone probably. Then at 25, I read 1984. That's a nice and easy one to type that I'm not going to mess up. In my review of this book, I hated it. And I stand by what I said. As a story, it is very unfulfilling. But it's so much more than that. And it was kind of dishonest of me to approach it solely from that lens. And I do say in the video that I know that it's more than that. I know its history and why it was so well regarded, especially for its time. But there's still a disconnect there of not appreciating it for what it is, I think. It was too controversial. I should have reined it in a little bit. But the main thing that like really changed how I view this book is a book that I read pretty recently called What We Owe the Future. And in that book, it's just talking about like how we need to do what we can for future humans, because there's probably going to be billions of them. So we should take account how we can help them out in the future. And one of the things that he was talking about in this book is how we could lock in horrible, terrible governments or religious institutions, whatever it be, such as 1984. Like, this could become the reality, and it could become incredibly difficult to overthrow. And that kind of changed how I think about this book in my mind, as like, it could be a potential reality for billions of people if we play our cards wrong. I still stand by that it's not an entertaining story. So I'll put in C. I'll compromise. Number 26, Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. This is, we all know what this book is. It is an absolutely heartbreaking look at what Anne Frank had to go through, and her growing up in probably the worst conditions imaginable. Like, you can't say that this book is anything but an absolute historic marvel for existing, and a testament to all people that you should be keeping journals. Number 27, Letters to a Young Contrarian. Don't know how you spell that one, but I got close enough. So I don't remember most about this book, if I'm being perfectly honest. I remember that I liked hearing more about Christopher Hitchens and his journalistic efforts and stories about his travels, because I basically only knew him from his atheist interviews and atheist debates. So getting to see this side of him was pretty nice, but overall I don't remember most of the points that he was trying to get across too well. I remember that there were a lot of references that just went straight over my head, and that a lot of the broader points just felt like I need to come back to in the future. I feel like I wasn't ready to read this book when I read it, and I wasn't like giving it a lot of thought or a lot of time at the time. Like, at this point I was trying to just read as many books as quickly as I could, which thankfully I stopped and I slowed down a little bit later. But I remember thinking it was something that I should come back to, pretty much. Of Mice and Men. I love this book very much. It was another one of the ones that made me want to read so much more. It made me want to read more John Steinbeck. And then later on I read a couple other books, which we'll get to soon, neither of which met my expectations based off of this one. But Of Mice and Men, it's like 110 pages, so tightly written, so touching. Such a good story. Like, if you don't like this book, it was only because you were forced to read it in school. There's no other reason why you could not like this book. Number 29, Saga Volume 1. I don't like Saga. If I find Saga 2 at a used bookstore, I'll probably pick it up because it wasn't horrible. It just felt like it was trying to be way more serious than it should have. It felt like a 14-year-old was trying to be deep, essentially, with its depiction specifically of when, I don't remember his name, but the one like soldier guy goes to this planet and basically finds a cult of a particular sort that is doing things with children, and he basically just murders the guy there, and it feels like it's trying to be very serious, when it shouldn't be that serious. It feels like it's not giving it the respect that it deserves in a way. But I would read the second copy if I find it at a used bookstore, because it has some potential. It's not a horrible thing. The Catcher in the Rye? Yes, In the Rye, duh. I read this book, I know. By, what's his name? This is Kurt Vonnegut? No, DJ Salinger. I do get those guys mixed up in my head all the time. I hated this book while I was reading it. I don't remember the name of the main character, but he's an absolute just slog to read. He is so down in the dumps and just depressing the entire way through. And I was that kid once. I was him at one point. And that's part of the reason why it was so frustrating to read, because I was like, oh, you're so dumb. It's gonna get better. Just let me give you a hug and just, it will be better. That's the feeling that I had through the entirety of the book. It wasn't until I finished the book that I started to actually appreciate it for what it was. But it was so hard to get through. Very worth the read though. I understand why it's a classic. The Old Man and the Sea. Didn't like this one at all. It's basically just a guy putting a bunch of people in danger, going to search for him when he's trying to catch a fish that he doesn't have the skill or the tools to manage. And I don't mean to be defeatist, because obviously the idea is that you should persevere, that you should stick to your guns. But this guy shouldn't have. He should have turned back, because there were people who care about him, who were waiting for him, and they searched for him and were worried about him and thought he was dead. And he got nothing for it. Bad story. Fight Me. Mouse by Art Spiegelman. This one I DNF'd. I'm not happy to say that, because I know how important this book is, and like there was nothing particularly wrong with it. It was boring me. I don't remember exactly why, but it was boring me, and so I decided not to finish it. I do understand that it's incredibly important in its depictions, and especially in its depiction of the father figure, the one who the story is actually about, and how he was not the perfect victim, but he was still very much a victim, obviously, in his story going through that. I should probably reread it. I don't know if I will though, because I remember it being boring. And I don't like saying that, but it was. Number 33, we have I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. I feel very bad for Jennette and what she had to go through. I would never have guessed that watching iCarly grow up, that she was going through what she was going through and basically just being horribly abused by her mother. The story is very touching. It's very hard to read at some points. I'd particularly recommend the audiobook version. But yeah, it's very powerful. It's a very powerful story of abuse and recovery from it. Highly recommended. Yeah, S tier, definitely. Then we have number 34, Things My son needs to know about the world by Fredrik Backman. Yeah. I really like Fredrik Backman. I've only read 2 of his books so far. The other one we'll get to in a minute. This is just so sweet. As someone who really is looking forward to being a father one day, absolutely touching. To anyone who does want to be a father, or a mother, just a parent in general, read this book. Very touching. Number 35, We Are Okay by Nina LaCour, I think. Oh, look at me. I got one right. This book, it's a little melodramatic, but it very much captures that depressive mood. That is what the story is talking about. And because of that, it was kind of hard to read because it kind of put me in that mood, which is something that I very much try to avoid because I'm kind of susceptible to depressive episodes based off of things such as this. But getting through it was very good. The story and the payoff, very good. It was another one that was recommended by John Green. He's got pretty good taste, even if he's not talking about things that I wish he were talking about. This is the first Ray Bradbury book that I read, and I really liked it. It's definitely showing its age in some aspects, but the overall idea of the story and the kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? The kind of anthology storytelling that it uses, of how like it doesn't have main characters that it focuses on. It just goes through like a timeline of people visiting Mars over, I think, like 1,000 years, something like that. And it's very interesting. It touches on some very interesting issues and questions, as well as particularly, if you've read this book, you know about the like mansion story. That was my favorite. That one was hilarious. It was so entertaining. Overall, pretty freaking good book. Not quite A tier material though. Can you load it? So this is the first book that I actually dropped my jaw to. Dorian Gray. Overall, I didn't like love the book. It was pretty good, but like the twist that is in here, like absolute jaw dropper. It was so good. Not worth the slog of chapter 13 though. I think it was chapter 13, the longest book, or the longest chapter in the book, where he's just fixating on a whole bunch of different hobbies. That almost made me put the book down. But Dorian Gray's writing style, like Oscar Wilde, it is written by Oscar Wilde, right? I'm not crazy. Yeah, by Oscar Wilde. Such a beautiful writing style. The prose are absolutely fantastic. Solid B tier book. Dorian Gray, number 38. Romeo and Juliet. I had never, where's like the actual book? There we go. I had never read any Shakespeare before this. I know, shocker, but I didn't read anything in school. And it was so interesting to actually know the full story before. Like obviously I knew bits and pieces from pop culture references, but knowing the actual reasons why they killed themselves and how that actually happened makes so much more sense. I thought it was just, I don't remember exactly what I thought, but I didn't know that they had semi-legitimate reasons why it played out how it did. The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. This is my first Dawkins book that I have read, and I liked it a lot. Some chapters did drag a little bit for me, but for the most part, I thought it was just a wonderful exploration of the evolution of genes and how we've come to become what we are. I thought it was very, very interesting and very effective at getting its point across. and particularly the section of the book where it talks about ants was one of my favorite, because I just think ants are super interesting. If you have any interest in biology in general, this is a very solid recommendation. I also really like one of the later chapters. He talks about memes. He's actually the one who coined the word meme, and it's basically just the idea of mental genes, of how certain ideas are better or worse at copying themselves in terms of like you spreading them to someone else's mind. Like anger or outrage is a particularly good example of them, because if you're angry about something, you're gonna tell somebody. So they're very good at spreading themselves. Good book, recommended. S tier. A tier. Then we have The Pearl by John Steinbeck, the second book that I read by him, which was still very good. I think that this would make an absolutely amazing modern screenplay. I know that there's an old movie based on it. I haven't seen that. I really should though, because I think it's like the perfect length and the perfect style for a absolutely fantastic movie. Particularly, I think it should be made in like a Studio Ghibli style of like Princess Kyurugwe. I think something like that would be an absolute masterpiece. Just maybe change the ending. If you know, you know. But good book, recommended. Solid B tier. Number 40, we have, how long? God, I'm almost at an hour. I really hope I can chew this down a little bit. Why Vegan by Peter Singer. This is a very short book. It doesn't go nearly in depth as I would like it to, but it's not trying to be like an exhaustive list of reasons why you should go vegan. It does provide a lot of further reading, but for the most part, it's just presenting the arguments for the environmental factors as well as the suffering of the animals. Like, that's pretty irrefutable, and it's definitely something that we as a society need to consider, or at very least eating a lot less meat. But yeah, it was okay. I need to read more in that style of book, the philosophy of like veganism in general, because I think that that's probably an issue that's not getting nearly as much dedication as it deserves for how important it is. Brave New World. This one was not as good as I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be fantastic, and it was pretty good. The overall idea of the book is pretty interesting. I think the execution was a little weird. I don't remember enough about it to say too much more. I know that I talk about it in one of my wrap-up videos that I did like 8 months ago. But yeah, I remember it being okay, and just okay. Kind of disappointing. Then we have number 43, Pet Sematary. This book was not quite as good as I expected it to be after coming off of Misery, but it was still pretty good. It was solid. It wasn't nearly as scary as I thought it was going to be, because a lot of people are saying that this is like his most terrifying book that he's ever written. I didn't really find it scary. Maybe it was because I was reading it in the middle of the day. Maybe if I had read this at night, I would have felt a little bit different. And the ending, I wasn't a huge fan of. But the story of the family, particularly, like the family dynamics, I really enjoyed that. Solid B tier. Solid B tier. Almost an A tier book, but not quite. Then we have The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. Again, love John Green. Great guy, doing so much great work, especially with what he's doing with tuberculosis right now. I wish he'd be a little less silent on certain issues, such as, well, exclusively on Palestine. I wish that he would speak up a lot more. and the fact that he's not is very frustrating to me, and I am having a hard time understanding why. However, that's outside the scope of this video. The Fault in Our Stars was very beautifully written. John Green writes beautiful prose. It's not meant for me, it's meant for teenage girls, and because of that I couldn't relate to it as much. But obviously I can still recognize that it's a very solid book, and I would recommend it to most people. Crest of the Emerald. Jesus Christ. C. This was my first Brandon Sanderson book that I've ever read, and it's gonna be hard for any of the ones that I read after this to not disappoint. I loved this book. It's probably my third favorite book that I've ever read. And that's, I mean, I haven't read like a ton of books, but I've read a decent amount. It was so good for me, and in no small part because I grew up watching The Princess Bride. That's one of my favorite movies. And this very much has the same kind of feeling and like in some sense, a similar story structure to it. I thought that the world building was so interesting, particularly with the seas and the spores. Absolutely fantastic, and the character development was very good. My only criticism of it is the bad guys kind of felt like they were just brushed off. Like they weren't really an issue. They got dealt with a little too easily. But I don't mind, because overall, fantastic book, and I loved every second of reading it. Number 46, A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor. I am way too used to having autocorrect. Way too used to that. Okay, so like I was saying earlier about An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, that one was pretty good. This one was very good. It continues the story, fleshes it out more, fleshes out the characters more, and has a very satisfying ending to the story. Very good sci-fi book, would highly recommend. A Man Called Ove, again by Fredrik Backman. This book was so absolutely touching. It was so sweet. I don't like how much I relate to Ove, and I fear becoming him. But seeing him finding a family and gaining some level of happiness through that after the passing of his wife was so lovely. Like, I don't like how much I relate to Ove as a person, but what a wonderfully touching story. Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life. Scott Pilgrim's not a good person. I don't like how long it took me to realize that. It wasn't until I was rewatching the movie like last year that I realized, like, oh, Scott's kind of the bad guy. I don't know why it took me so long to realize that. Although I hadn't watched it since I was like 16. So like 16-year-old me was stupid. But I don't know why I put it in D tier. It's definitely a C tier book. The movie's better than at least this comic. I haven't read any of the other ones, but it's pretty good. It's very funny. Number 49, Tortilla Flat. I went back to correct it, but it was still wrong. This was the first John Steinbeck book that I really didn't like. It's so monotonous and so boring. Why are any of these things happening? Why are you telling us about these poor nobodies just going about doing random stuff and drinking wine and partying? I did not care. It was not interesting. And like, what kind of sense did the end make? None. I remember as I was reading it having some interesting qualities, like specifically about how like all these guys were veterans who had just come back from World War I, I think, and the destitution that they had because of that. But, oh my gosh, decide what you want to write about and create a narrative. Don't just dilly-dally your way to or through the entire book and then make up some weird ending because you don't know what you're doing. I really hope the rest of John Steinbeck's books are not like that one. Speaker for the Dead. Orson Scott Card is not a good person, and if you are going to read any of his books, find them used. But Ender's Game and Speaker for the Dead have very special places in my heart. Like, I can't reconcile how the man that wrote these two books is a homophobic bigot, because these books are so overflowing with understanding and love for the people that are other than you. Like, I can't reconcile how such a hateful person wrote such lovely, understanding books. Like, I genuinely don't think that the Orson Scott Card who wrote these books is still here. Like, something changed in him fundamentally. This book specifically has some pretty big plot issues. I was willing to overlook them, but I completely understand why some people don't like the book, other than the political reasons, obviously. But I still thought it was a really beautiful story, and I was willing to forgive the flaws that it does have. Next up, 51, is Paper Towns by John Green. If this was not a John Green book, I would not have finished it. I would have DNF'd it. It was, like, it's not bad. Some of the prose are very beautiful. It has some good lines. But the story was just basic and uninspiring, and I didn't relate to it very much. So, like, not horrible, but I was going in with super high expectations because a lot of people told me, like, it's their favorite John Green book. But no, I would not recommend it personally. Then 52, we have A People's History of the United States. Is that enough? Yes, that is enough. A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. A lot of people say, or I shouldn't say a lot of people, I've heard people say that this is incredibly biased and skews history. And I do need to look into that, because if that's the case, I don't want to be buying into the ideas that he puts forth in the book quite as much. But even if that is the case, overall, the level of bad that the United States has done in its founding and in its history is crazy. And, you know, obviously 23-year-old progressive me has some ideas that a lot of people don't agree with. So I'm not going to talk too much about that here. But, like, just seeing how much evil was done in America, and, like, how little has changed. It's like, it's crazy. And then the last book that I read in 2023, Persepolis. I don't remember who it's by. Persepolis by Marjorie Strappy? I don't know. This book was cute. It was, I don't know, it feels both like it's trying to tell a very mature tale while also being approachable to children, which is a little strange at times. I mean, it is the story of a childhood, but, like, it has some very serious topics that it covers, and it's, I don't know, it was a little strange, but overall it was good, and I'm looking forward to reading the second one. I will put it in B. Dang, I thought I was going to run out of space, but no, I got plenty of space. Yeah, overall, I'm pretty happy with the reading that I got done in 2023. Looking back, though, there's only, like, I think, like, 4 books by female authors. And as someone who's trying to learn and diversify through reading, that's something that I definitely could improve on. As well as this year, I'm just going to be reading a lot more nonfiction in general, just because I'm trying to pin down my political beliefs. But I'm pretty happy with this. You know, there weren't that many books that I really hated. And found a couple new favorites that I will love for the rest of my life, probably. But yeah, that's all I had to say. If you watched this monstrosity of a video that I'm gonna have to edit, thank you, and hopefully I will see you in the next one. Peace.